Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Payrollo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And we are at episode 78, The Analogy Show.
Which is like, it's like, no, I'm not going to do that.
So an analogy, as you all know, according to Merriam-Webster, is comparing two otherwise unlike things, or, so some kind of comparison. The example that they use is the brain as like a Swiss Army knife, able to deal with various challenges as they arise. It's saying that one thing is like another. And you hear a lot of these in the workplace. So everybody's familiar with the sports analogies. We're almost at the touchdown line or whatever, because I'm not a sports person, but, sports analogies. There was a recent kind of series that went around on social media where a woman was using the analogies of makeup to counteract the constant omnipresent sports metaphors and saying to her team in this little bit, like, I think we need to blend in the foundation a little bit more. I think we're running off without the mascara, and those kinds of things, right? So that's what we're talking about is analogies. What is useful? What's not useful? What do you think of in your own head? Like, are there personal analogies that work for you as an individual? And then what analogies do you use at the workplace? And what should you never use at the workplace?
Well, there's a friend of mine. She works for the Sacramento Water District, and which doesn't sound very interesting, but on the face of it, it actually ended up being what's happening there with the water in California going through Davis and all the aquifers and the saving the fish. It actually ended up being pretty complicated. And as I'm moving to Spain, I found a letter that she sent, and the letter she had sent me were the malapropisms employed by her boss. So he obviously read in some kind of management handbook that analogies were a good way to get your point across, but he got so far out on the pier of these analogies that I'd have to say that he was not actually on the pier anymore, was in the water, and they were just uproarious. They were hilarious. And sadly, she was the only one who found them amusing, which I think speaks to her level of intelligence. She's pretty bright. And she kept on running lists of them, and I was reading through them as I decided whether or not to keep the letter or throw it out. And they were just so brilliantly bad that I decided to keep them. I don't remember any, but it was like, a stitch in time saves 9. Okay, well, a sheep in the wool is worth 1 in the bush. What? So, I mean, on the one hand, she was smart enough to know what he was trying to say, but the other people that she worked with were, she kind of looks around to see if anybody was getting the joke, and they were just kind of sat there. So they were either not paying attention or they were just adrift with the boss. It was a funny way to teach.
And the reason that I like analogies is I find them to be useful for teaching. So one of the analogies that I use really frequently with my executive coaching clients is if I'm trying to get across the idea of maybe having a lighter touch on micromanaging and allowing people to solve their own problems, I will tell them a story of my daughter when she was probably, 7 or 8, taking over the chore of vacuuming. And that I looked at her vacuuming the carpeted hallway, and what she was doing was making patterns with the vacuum in the carpet because it was fun, and she was, 8. My first response was to tell her to do it in rows because that's how I vacuumed and it was faster. And then I stopped myself and I'm like, you've got a child who is happily vacuuming. What difference does it make if it takes her 10 more minutes if she's made it into a game? And what works about that analogy is that it's a story. People like stories. And it uses the image of a child vacuuming play to remind my coaching clients of the point that I'm trying to make, which is you don't need to be in charge of everything. Allowing people their own space and time to figure out how they want to accomplish a task, as long as they are doing the task appropriately, is something you should probably just let go. And, it usually lands. And so I do think that analogies can be useful for teaching, for modeling, for reminding in a way that if I were to say to a client, don't micromanage, it would land really differently.
Well, also too, I mean, this is what I was mentioning before, the Gnostics, so we're not going to write stuff down because who knows what frame of mind you're going to be in when you read it. I need to tell you. And a lot of times in places and situations in which people are resistant, I find analogies a good diversion, right? Because they're expecting this. Like I had that ex who was screaming at me, "Can't you just say anything in plain English?" And my attitude was no, because you're ready for that. So what I want to do is to kind of turn the temperature down in the room a bit and tell you a story that at the end of it'll grease the skids right to the point that I was making. And if you're paying attention, which given that's a story format, you should be, by the end, we both come to the same conclusion. And it kind of worked about half the time. I find it was most useful when you had a resistant audience, which I think, frankly, given workplace politics, you have to assume at least half the people there really don't want to be there. So you've got a resistant audience. I find it useful. Bad analogies, not the other boss, the malapropisms, but I have sometimes made the mistake of trundling into what I consider to be an unhelpful analogy. And those are ones that at the end of it end up sounding vaguely threatening, which is also a specialty of mine. And I try to keep that just with the parenting ones and not the workplace ones. Right. And I'm not threatening my kids, but it's usually like, it's like the same purpose at the Little Red Riding Hood story. It's a cautionary tale for kids. So that's what my analogies tend to trend toward in parenting, But
you bring up a really good point, which is it can be a skillful way to get someone to change their mind, right? So if you're in a conflict situation, saying, okay, let's think of it as if, right?
Correct.
But what I've also found, and maybe this is, I don't know, maybe this is gendered, but what I find is that when I use that tactic with a man, personally or professionally, sometimes it just makes him madder because he really doesn't want to change tracks. He is on a train that is about how he's right and his rational interpretation. And for me to use a storytelling mechanism or an analogy to say, why don't we shift perspective? Imagine if, and a lot of times the most incendiary ones are the, let's try the shoe on the other foot, where if I say to, and this has happened again, personally, professionally, so many times, when I say some version of, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, like, what if I did this to you? What if this happened and the gender roles were reversed? That always is like a match to gasoline, because I think there's some people that get so entrenched in their sense of rightness that's based in some identity that they really, they don't want to shift their perspective. They don't want to think that the shoe's on the other foot. Do you think that's true? Do you think that there's a gendered component to that?
A gender component, I don't know. I think it's a wrongness component. And naturally, being a Virgo, I would think that. I find that when people are wrong, they dig in harder, they resist more. There's, the stubbornness and defensiveness, and analogies are maybe, my last ditch attempt to kind of circumvent that. We're not at loggerheads. We're not hating each other. I'm trying to make a point that you need to be listening to. But of course, if it smells like spinach, people will reject it. If it smells like some kind of didactic thing that you have, even, and I've not had much luck with that shoe on the other foot thing either. That doesn't really, it doesn't, with me dealing with women using that, it absolutely doesn't work. So I think that the question is, I guess, can you use, is an analogy, are analogies useful? Can you misuse an analogy? In other words, can a person fabricating the analogy actually be wrong? Because usually it's a signal.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a false analogy, a false equivalency.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like this is a very dark one, but many times after my son died, people would say to me, "Oh my God, I know just how you feel. I had to put my cat down last week. It's
Jesus
just,
Christ. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's unfortunately the one that comes to my mind. So, there definitely are analogies where people make a false equivalency that's clearly like not okay. But I think I want to stop for a minute and go back because if we're using an analogy in a pedagogical context, right? Like you are trying to educate your team, you're trying to change the culture at work. If you're
Yes.
doing it in a work context where there isn't conflict, I think it's very different than using an analogy in a conflict situation, whether it's
Correct.
at work or personally. And we're kind of talking about the conflict thing. And what that makes me think of is, it was funny. I was recording a podcast this week. I was a guest on a podcast, and the woman was asking me questions about women dealing with conflict at work. Like, kind of what's the template? And I was like, conflict is so complicated. And one of the things that happens is you and I are both word people, right? Like we are writers. We think in terms of words. And one of the things to keep in mind in conflict situations is that there are people in a conflict who are less articulate, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe they're not word people. Maybe when they get upset or angry or fearful or emotional, they tend to shut down. They need to like move physically. Like I think I realized this about myself when I was pretty young, is that the madder I get, the more articulate I become.
Oh yeah. Likewise.
And I realized like that is anomalous.
Yeah. No, that's in actual fact, because a lot of arguments I've had over the course of my life have somehow trundled into the person trying to hit me. I realize that's also infuriating. That the angrier I get, the more articulate or quiet, and I'm
Right.
It doesn't sound like anybody listening would not believe I was angry at all. And that's I remember telling somebody, why does everybody I punch in the face have the same look when I punch them in the face? It's a mixture of not so much that they're hurt, but they're surprised. How is it they're surprised, especially when I told them, if you do that again, I'll punch you in the face? And Kasha actually said to me, she goes, it's because you're smiling when you say it. So I discovered something strange about myself. She had the misfortune of seeing me in a scuffle in Brussels. Some guy was just really, really working me. And I said, I need you to leave me alone now. And I, just like that, I smiled. He goes, I said, he goes, I said, I think I'll be forced to strike you. And he goes, do what you got to do. And of course I struck him, So he was not, we had reached the end of a useful argument at that point. So I thought that was a teachable moment. And, was proud that I had done so.
Well, and not being one to strike people in the face. What I find, and I do signal I'm go full Italian when I'm angry.
Yep.
I mean, I'm
Yep.
yelling. I don't throw things anymore, but it has happened in my past. I am a woman who is capable of throwing things, and I think I project that when I'm angry. But I do get very focused.
Yes.
And I think what happens is, that sort of turbocharged quickness with words is frustrating under the best of circumstances. It is especially frustrating if the person who's receiving it actually gets quieter or shuts down or gets kind of flooded or overwhelmed when they're arguing. Why are you smiling?
I'm smiling because so words are our thing. And I'm thinking, these people that are not good with words. But I remember having a roommate who was very good at math. And we would get into these raging arguments over the phone bill once a month. But I'm not that good at math. So he said, why am I paying so much? He goes, it's very simple. And he would do with me with numbers what I would do with other people with words. And so I did develop an understanding of how infuriating it is to be out of your depth, or rather in someone else's depth.
Right.
So I tried to be a little bit more gracious with the words after that, because I lost every single phone bill argument because I just wasn't as good in math as he was. He's an engineer. So
well, and I think too, I definitely have had experiences, in the professional realm where someone who's trying to best me realizes what they're up against, and I best them. And there is that reaction. And sometimes, oddly, what I have found is that sometimes there's a respect, right? Like somebody who, I think generally people who are really smart, like good leaders who are really smart, they like to have somebody who can push back.
Yep.
Like some of my best client relationships were with, men in power who had everybody say yes to them. And I would come in and be like, I don't know, maybe not. Let's think about it. And they appreciated that sort of pushback. It's usually weaker people who are like, wait a minute, you're not like, they take it a little bit more personally.
That's what I was saying about it. It is less, I figure, less about gender and more about the rightness or wrongness of your case. Right. So I think if there's rectitude, if you are right, you articulate or not, you seem to you fare better in the long run. I mean, which is instructive, because if I'm wrong, I immediately cop to it, like immediately. Like, I'm not wasting any time. I just, you're right. You got me. I'm done. I screwed up, but and so we can move ahead. I'm not going to drag that out any longer. Not first. I don't want to luxuriate in my wrongness by defending it past the point of some good sense. So.
Well, and I think, the analogy that I was thinking about, so my favorite analogy for myself and often to use with clients is the analogy of parenting. And I want to name that is risky because workplaces are not families. The people that work for us, if we're in management, are not children, right? So I want to say this is a risky analogy, but I find it to be really effective when talking about leadership, right? So here's the reasons that I think that there's something to think about. So one of the key points that I think is difficult for leaders is to effectively regulate their emotions.
Yes.
And parents understand how to do that, right? Yeah, so I always remember when I was, when RJ, my son, was little, we lived in you will probably remember this, we lived in an apartment building on the second floor in East Palo Alto. And he was like 3 or 4. And to get up to that floor, there was a really rickety elevator, like one of those old school, like it literally had that grate that you pull. Yep. I am a little bit nervous in elevators. And we got into the elevator. It went up about 4 feet and then it stopped. Now there's no bell to push. There's no thing to do. Had I been by myself or with another adult, I would have lost my shit. But RJ, who's, a very young child at this point, preschool, looks up at me and he's like, should we be afraid?
Yep.
And I instantly, without even thinking about it, went into like, oops, looks like the elevator isn't working. Let me see if I can push some buttons and fix it. And it was fixed. And so I do think that that's a useful muscle for leaders to build. Right. Yeah. To recognize my response in this moment, whether it's fear or anger or whatever, is gonna telegraph to everybody in the room, everybody on my team, whether or not this is an alarm. Right. And sometimes you do want to signal alarm, but it's just like I always say, people, if the air gets bumpy in a plane, people are looking to the flight attendants.
Yeah.
And when the flight attendants freak out, we're worried.
That's the thing I found about when I worked for convicted felon Carlos Watson, that I remember at one point, it hadn't dawned on me before, but eventually, probably in year 2, the words emblazoned in my mind, they kind of emerged, drama queen. And I go, oh, it's terrible to have a boss who's a drama queen, because while he's working his emotions out in a very public way, it completely destabilizes the people who are exposed to the blast furnace of his upset. So I found that to be a really ineffective way to lead. I didn't like it. Didn't work for me. So
another parenting lesson is making decisions with a view to what is good for the whole, not just the individual, right? Yeah. And again, I'm not suggesting that parents should be sacrificing their own well-being, but generally most good parents will consider their needs, the needs of the children, the needs of other people in the family, and balance those in some way that seems equitable to them. And I think that is, again, another muscle to build in leadership. What is best for the whole? And that might require another parenting lesson, is making some difficult decisions, right? So think about things that what I think of as good parents or good enough parents try to do. You have to have hard conversations.
Yep.
Right? You have to have hard conversations with your kids. You have to have conversations about boundaries, about what mom or dad is or isn't going to do. You have to enforce those boundaries. They have to be consequences for them. And then you have to recognize that, like, sometimes the people you lead, just like the people you parent, are going to hate your guts.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
And that can't be your decision-making criteria. My kids are going to hate me if I X is not a reason to not do X if X is something that is for the safety and well-being of your children or your family.
Right. Correct.
Right.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean that you don't notice or that it's, and then I think also realizing that employees and children are rarely going to see your side. Right? Like, there's no, I mean, I'm sure all of us heard our parents or adults say, well, you wait till you grow up, you'll understand. And which I don't think conveyed much to any kid, because the concept of getting up and going to work at a job you don't like and paying the bills and all, that's alien.
But
right?
you know what? Let me tell you, I heard that a fair amount growing up, and I remembered some of those instances, and I called bullshit on them after I was a grown up. I was like, okay, it took me 30 years to get to that point, and mostly in relationship to my father. I was like, that's a crock of shit. Yeah, I wish we were in touch so I could tell him. So yeah, that's
yes, that is true. But I do think that the expectation that your kids or your employees are going to take your side, understand your perspective without you explaining it to them, give you the benefit of the doubt for things that you have not told them, right? There is an expectation of grace extended, which I think is unrealistic if you are a parent or a manager. And I think just getting that out of the gate and understanding that, sure, people are going to be, considerate, and they're going to be thoughtful, kids or employees, but it's the exception rather than the rule.
Also, I think this is what analogies are great for, because it is something that somebody can actually carry away with them, and in a less guarded moment, in the privacy of their own home or whatever, it might actually pierce. It might work in a way that the more direct approach, when the person remembers it later on the drive home or in another meeting with another employee, and they start to dig in or that it won't. The story might actually work. And I found in terms of, if we talk about parenting and being parented, that was the case, that there were some things that my parents ended up telling me that using analogies and that kind of format, that later I kind of, in the privacy of my own room, could think about it and go, yeah, I got that. I got it. Yeah. So,
well, the other advantage of using an analogy is that you can borrow competence. So, for example, if I'm talking to a woman who is re-entering the workforce after having been home with young children for a number of years, and she was expressing to me a certain hesitancy about, I've missed so much, whatever, I might try to focus on okay, what did you learn parenting 3 young children? Let's just review the project management skills, the conflict mediation skills, the determination. And these are very real things. And I think that analogies can also highlight areas of competence, right? And it doesn't have to be parenting. It could be someone who's very good at sports, right? Like I've had some executive coaching clients who were very accomplished athletes, right? Maybe, college level athletes, even Olympians who, who I've known, and even way past the time of their being actively participating in a competitive level in that sport, it formed them. And for them to say, okay, I'm doing this new thing. What did I learn from doing sport that can impact me?
Well, I've said this before, so you might remember, but I'm going to repeat it here. They did a study, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years of people who graduated from Ivy League universities, and they wondered who did the best. Was it legacy kids? Was it, socioeconomic kids, kids from the East Coast? Who did best at all these 5-year markers? And they found that one category consistently did best from school to school across America. And it was athletes, and they were trying to figure out why. And then some social scientists said, well, the least ways we can figure out, it has to do with them being comfortable with failure. Which you don't, if you got some kid who's in Harvard and graduates from Harvard and is not an athlete, this kid has pretty much had lots go right. So when they get into the work world and stuff doesn't go right the way it doesn't always go right in the work world, they don't know what to do and don't know how to process it. But the athletes were like, you get back in there, you're going to lose some, you're going to win some, you get back in there and you'll make it happen. So I thought that was a pretty compelling argument for getting your kids into sports. So
there's also other things, though, to use that analogy. There's teamwork. You learn how to work with different people. You learn how to understand and manage conflict, right? Anybody that's been on a team has had a teammate who drives them crazy. And you learn how to work with that person and form a bond, even if you have frustration or conflict. You learn how to take directions. Most teams have a coach. There is a captain. You understand how to follow some kind of instructions or orders. And, there's a lot of things that go into people. I mean, I played a lot of sports when I was in high school that forms you, and especially also the confidence, the physical, abilities, the idea that sometimes that there's a job, hard work aspect to it, but there's also a fun joy aspect to it, which the luckiest among us get to bring to work. But Eugene, do you have a fire me or fire me adjacent?
Yeah, it's a fire me. Adjacency is a good. Kristen Cabot. I don't know if that name means anything to you. She was part of the couple, what they now call the Coldplay couple. She and the CEO of her company, she was the head of HR. The CEO went to a Coldplay concert and were caught on the kiss cam embracing. And of course, it became a big deal because Chris Martin, singer for Coldplay, said, well, they're either having an affair or they're just very shy. And of course, it went public. Turns out they were having an affair. Her husband jumped out front immediately, pretty quickly, and said, look, we're separated. So what she does in her own time is her business. The CEO of Astronomer was the name of the company, said nothing. He was married, said nothing, had led her to believe that he was also separated, which is a common dodge. And she this week went on Oprah and said, hey, you know what? I can't find a job. And, this stinks of a certain kind of weird misogyny, because once people found out that I was separated, in other words, cleared to have a relationship with whoever I wanted, and he wasn't, then the hostility turned to me being a home wrecker, where I wasn't actually. I just believed him, So on the one hand, you have this issue of, a person who's the head of HR is, you want to question the competence of somebody who's the head of HR who should know better than to have a workplace romance. But on the other hand, the fact that the punishment has been so disproportionate, really makes you want to, if he's got to pass, he lost his job as well. But, I don't know if he's gotten a new one, but he's been very quiet. But it seems I've been trying to figure out, how do you apportion the guilt and the responsibility here? Is she a good HR woman? She might be very good at her job and just had a very bad day. So I figured that this was a food for thought type fire me. Right?
Well, and it's funny because, the idea that there is a disparity in terms of how women are judged, particularly around anything to do with sexuality or relationships, and the way men are judged is no news to me.
Yeah,
right?
Correct.
And, it's interesting because I've certainly seen lots of circumstances, none of which I'm going to talk about publicly, where a man and a woman has an affair and the woman bears the brunt of the opprobrium or calumny or whatever word we want to use. the idea that she then can't get another job, my guess is he will get another job because he's a white male CEO and these things are tolerated, right? And I think it comes down to this notion of who is tolerated and what they get away with, right? Like, I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting is that, we've talked a lot about the fact that Donald Trump has done things with children that are illegal, immoral, and reprehensible, and is still the president of the United States. When we are recording this just happened. Revelations, very disturbing revelations came out about Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And I have not seen or heard one Latino come out in support of he was wronged, right? Like there's just a universal, from what I can see in that community, a universal opprobrium. Absolutely. Take that, take down the murals, take down the pictures, hold this man accountable. Even, he's been dead for many years. Obviously, he was a revered hero. Now that we have this information, everyone believes the women that are coming forward. There's no argument. There's no debate in that community. It's like, okay, he's out. He's done. There's no debate about it, right? The story ran in the New York Times. Dolores Huerta, who is also one of the leaders of the farm workers organization with him, said he raped her. And I mean, and I think that's part of it is it's like, what culture are we participating in? Because the culture itself has spoken or unspoken rules about who is held accountable, right? And generally it's not the white guy. And it is other people who are participating in this.
Well, also too, this, I mean, I don't know if it works this way for you, but anytime there's like a heinous crime, people in minority categories, like, please don't let this person be from my group. Please don't there's a serial killer and he's been eating people's brains and whatever, keeping them in the basement. And, you'll read for the description. And usually if they don't give a cultural designation, but by the time you get to the end of the article, it's because he's white, but then you still wait for the picture and the picture shows up. It's like, So I think with something like Cesar Chavez, it's like, oh my God, how could you do this to us? So of course, the community is going to be like, no, there's nobody rushing to defend. There was nobody rushing to defend R. Kelly or, the people, in the courthouse when P. Diddy beat some of his charges that were celebrating and the O.J. Simpson thing. But, in general, it's like, hey, if you're going to embarrass us on a world stage, you're on your own. And that doesn't seem to exist with the white cats. So,
Well, and I mean,
even Lance Armstrong, people were like, so all those guys are on steroids. It's like, come on, Ben Johnson sitting around, the guy, his name is Mud now because why? Okay, steroids? Okay.
Right.
I'm sorry to go back in time. Ben Johnson was a former Olympian who got busted for status all.
Right. But I do think it is important to recognize that these circumstances are evidence of larger systemic issues at play, and people are judged differently. Different genders are judged differently, and we just need to name that. So, okay. Yep. That's all we've got time for. If you have ideas for future shows or comments on this one or anything else, send an email. I promise I will read and respond. WTF@badbossbrief.com. WTF@badbossbrief.com. And we will see you again in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Adios.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your host, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Payrollo. You can check out more of their work by visiting spayrollo.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's the number 3, on Insta. Reach out with your questions, concerns, work case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. Stephanie will personally answer every single submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for new episodes of Bad Boss Brief so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.